Coming up,
I'm Mike Dunleavy.
from day one, the governor proceeded to shake up the status quo. From unprecedented budget cuts to battles over the permanent fund dividend to a recall movement, one political aftershock after another.
We have some serious issues. Anybody that goes into these jobs really should be going into them to fix issues, to make things better.
Ahead, what's next for year two? Will turmoil be the new normal?
Alaska, where there are old triumphs, but also new frontiers, with challenges as great as the state itself, but a belief that the best is yet to come, bringing you the faces, the places, and the spirit of the last frontier. This is Frontiers with Rhonda McBride.
Welcome to Frontiers. Now that the governor's first year in office is in the rearview mirror, we thought it'd be a good time to look back. And right from the get-go, things didn't always go as expected.
I, Michael J. Dunleavy,
Do solemnly swear or affirm
do solemnly swear or affirm
Michael Dunleavy was the first governor to be sworn in north of the Arctic Circle. He was supposed to take his oath of office in Noorvik, where his wife Rose is from, but weather diverted their flight to Kotzebue, and from there, it's been one surprise after another. We're recording this interview on Tuesday, December 3rd, 2019, exactly 1 year to the day of your inauguration last year. So that's important to note before we go on. You know,
It goes by fast.
it does. That was the day a year ago that you were north of the Arctic Circle. What stands out for you about that day?
You know, most of the inaugurations have taken place in the cities in Alaska. And I just thought it was appropriate that we spent a lot of time out there. We made that aware that rural Alaska was not going to be forgotten. And that rural Alaska is Alaska. Not saying the urban areas aren't, but rural Alaska is Alaska.
So if you could travel back in time to that day, what would the Governor Dunleavy of today tell the Mike Dunleavy of yesterday who was being sworn in?
Get ready for a budget discussion like no other. Just get ready for that.
When you were in Noorvik 1 year ago today, you told the crowd that you had their back. I remember those exact words.
And I also
have
said I
your
will
back.
never forget rural Alaska. I also said that.
So how have you fulfilled that pledge?
We are laser focused on public safety. We repealed SB 91, which we thought had some issues in it that risked the public safety. We repealed that. We put in stronger laws. We are in the process of hiring more state troopers to be in rural Alaska. We have a reading program that we're going to be implementing in some of our poorest performing schools in rural Alaska, so that all of our kids are reading by the time they get out of third grade. We're going to increase the requirement for algebra by the time a kid leaves 8th grade, a child leaves 8th grade. These are incredibly important issues. So there's been a lot of noise, no doubt about it, but we continue to we continue to govern. We continue to try and solve these problems, and we'll continue to do that, despite what some people say.
In my mind, I associate you as the earthquake governor because you took office several days after a 7.1 magnitude quake. But in terms of what followed, it's been one jolt after another with unprecedented budget cuts.
Have we made some difficult decisions to try and fix the fiscal issue? Absolutely. There was no reason for me to run for office just to be called governor. We have some serious issues. Anybody that goes into these jobs really should be going into them to fix issues, to make things better. And during that process, you're going to get roughed up. You're going to get beat up. You're going to get smacked around. And especially if you're trying to change things. Alaska has, for 40 years, has been on a diet of spending. Oftentimes, we don't even have discussions about our outcomes. The name of the game and the most important thing for a lot of Alaskans is how to get money from the state of Alaska. That's why you would see a lot of protests during budgetary times. But you don't see a lot of protests when it comes to reading outcomes. The streets are not filled with Alaskans protesting our poor reading scores in some of our schools. You don't see a lot of protests in the streets of Alaska, hundreds or thousands of people protesting our high rates of domestic violence and sexual assault. You don't see that. We know they're there.
I think we're starting to.
I hope so. I hope so, because it's got to be more. Alaska has got to be more than just how much money can we get from the government. It's got to be about outcomes. It's got to be about better educational outcomes. It's got to be about protecting Alaska. It's got to be about these things. And until that happens, the focus will solely be on inputs, how much money we can put in there. But in answer to your question, you're not going to fix things in this environment without changing things.
So what lessons have you learned in your first year? Have there been some important lessons?
If I could turn back the hands of time and be prepared for certain things, would be to communicate better, to really communicate better and through many different channels. I think when that happens, people understand why you're doing something. And I think that was lost to some extent this past year. With social media now and blogs, there's instantaneous communication, and oftentimes that communication is not necessarily accurate. It was like, for example, I was tagged for not caring about elderly people. I was tagged about not caring about children, not caring about women, not caring about rural Alaska, et cetera. None of this was true. It's the type of language and the type of approach that grabs people's attention.
For the people of Cordova who are doing without ferry service this winter.
Yeah, it's tough. It's difficult. There's no doubt about it. Especially when you're used to a service such as a transportation service, such as the ferry.
But if we did that to the Mat-Su, for example, as a state, and just shut down a road to save money, how can we shut down the ferries?
Well, part of the problem with ferries are you have some boats that are 50 years old, and we have some structural mechanical issues with these boats. And we're going to have a robust discussion regarding the ferries this year. Are we going to invest millions and millions of dollars into new boats? Do we want to have a system where on the islands especially you can connect communities with roads so that you don't need as many routes or as many scheduled routes, but can use roads for people? And that's going to cost money. We understand that. There's a lot of places in the state that don't have roads and don't have ferries. I lived in Northwest Arctic in the Bering Strait area for almost 20 years. The only way you got in and out of there was aircraft. And I'm not saying the people of Cordova
roll the clock back. Isn't that what you're saying?
No, I'm not saying roll the clock back. But what I am saying is, it would be a different discussion, Rhonda, if we had $10 billion revenue, and we had to make some difficult decisions with the ferry. But we have a budget. We have some budget decisions that we have to make, and there are some safety issues regarding those boats that have to be taken into consideration. I don't show it oftentimes, but I don't get in my car and go home and say to myself, well, forget those people in Cordova, forget those people in Kodiak.
How about the seniors that are in these pioneer homes that are suddenly finding that they have rates that they can't afford, that they don't have the savings to pay?
Incredibly difficult decisions, and I understand that this impacts individuals. And that's the question we have to settle this year. What are the services, as you mentioned, that we want to keep? What do we value, and how do we want to pay for it? How do we want to pay for these services? Because a lot of what we do in Alaska is subsidized by the state, a lot of the things.
So if you could accomplish something next year beyond communicating better.
Settle the issue on the PFD and settle the issue on how we're going to pay for government.
And what will you say to those who were expecting full dividends based on the traditional formula?
We don't know what that's going to be. We don't know what that's going to look like. That's part of the legislative process. We have to decide how we want to pay for this government. We have to decide what services you want. Again, I have a lot of faith in the people of Alaska. I really do.
Up next, in the game of political poker, the governor holds his cards close to the vest. But did he reveal any clues about his next budget? Early into his first year, the governor faced an equal and opposite reaction to his deep budget cuts, the largest in state history.
Hey, hey! Ho, ho! Dunleavy has got to go, hey!
A recall movement was part of that backlash. The campaign amassed more than 40,000 signatures. Now, it's in a holding pattern. The courts must decide if the campaign can go forward. As for the court of public opinion, that appears to be the focus of the governor's second year in office. being governor in the best of times and in the worst of times is still a difficult job. And I'm sure a lot of our viewers would want to know, did you have any fun?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I did. I mean, you know, they say happiness is a state of mind, right? You can choose to be happy or unhappy. I choose to be happy.
So what made you happy this year?
Well, again, it's a state of mind. Certainly not reducing the budget and impacting people's lives in a negative way. That certainly doesn't make me happy. It doesn't make anyone happy. But I guess what I'm trying to say is one can keep a positive attitude and understand that the job that they've accepted, this is a great responsibility. It's an honor to be governor of the state of Alaska. I think this is the greatest state in the country. I knew what I was getting into.
Did you really?
Sure, absolutely.
Did you really realize that you'd face a recall?
Yeah, that's a twist. But I certainly knew there would be individuals voicing their opposition to some of the decisions that we made. You've had that in previous administrations as well. You'll have that in succeeding administrations as well. But the issue of a recall, I believe, was, I didn't foresee that. I think, and really there was discussion about that a mere 3 months into my term. This is 3 months into a 4-year term. And so I guess the issue of fairness and timing, I think, is important. So for example, we reduced the budget to try and close the gap, not to hurt people. And many people said that that would ruin Alaska. That's going to destroy Alaska. It's going to destroy the economy. As of today, the economic indicators tell a different story. The economic indicators across the board, unemployment rates, GDP growth, personal income growth, investment, they're all up.
But some of those things are front-loaded in previous years. For example, oil exploration, those decisions are sometimes made years out.
Right.
So
right.
the jobs created by them come from...
Right, and that's going to be an interesting discussion as to that very topic, because of course we have ballot initiatives and we have folks talking about different revenue and how that plays into it. But nonetheless, it would appear that we are out of recession. Now, trust me, I'm not taking credit for all of those things happening, because as you mentioned, some of those things were coming into place years ago with investment. But what I was told by some in response to the reductions, that those reductions would tank the economy. You just throw us back into recession, it's going to be awful. What I'm trying to say is, it appears that the growing economy has absorbed these reductions. It would appear that the end of the world scenario has not manifested itself.
A lot of people are curious about how you are going to handle the budget, if you will kind of double down on last year's cuts.
We do have a budget deficit. We still have to address that. You have an oil tax initiative that could be going on the ballot. And so all of these things are going to come into play in the discussion as to what we want Alaska to look like. Nothing's free. Nothing is free. For 40 years, we had the luxury of having oil take care of us. So we have to make some decisions. Shrink the government or take money from people. That's what we have to decide this year. It's like unwrapping a Christmas present. No, we're wrapping up the details, and so we'll have it ready when we roll it out here before the 15th.
So should we be bracing for more budget cuts?
I think we should be. I think we should be prepared for the discussion that we still have a pretty big deficit. So we should be prepared for that. How we're going to deal with it.
And no other details other than that.
We're not done putting it together yet. When we are and we roll it out, you'll be there, I'm sure, Rhonda.
The permanent fund seems to be the centerpiece of the budget debate, and it's bitter, it's dividing.
Yeah.
You have proposed one idea that initially you wanted to restore a full dividend, use the traditional formula. Governor Walker, before you, decided to take the unprecedented step of tapping the earnings. It probably cost him his re-election, that move. You offered to restore it, not only restore it to the traditional dividend, but also pay back what was taken. So where are we with that plan?
So let me clarify. I have always believed, back when I was a senator, even before that when I was not in office, that the permanent fund was developed to save money, save a non-renewable resource, oil, for future generations. Some people have said that I believe that the entire permanent fund should be used for a dividend. I never believed that. I've always said if you want to make changes to that PFD program, we should involve the people of Alaska. Now, some people have said, why do you want to do that? That's why we elect you to make those decisions. You do, But we're only one of a handful of states that has an initiative and referendum process in our Constitution. And what does that mean? If we change that PFD without a discussion of the people of Alaska, and we change the law surrounding that, the people of Alaska could unwind that if they don't agree with it in a repeal process. And so my goal has been, if we're going to change the permanent fund to a POMV concept,
Percent of market
yes,
value.
a 50-50 split, whatever, that the people should be part of that. Because if they're part of it up front, then you have more certainty that you're going to have a permanent fiscal plan going forward. So that's the discussion that we started last year. That's the discussion that we have to finish this year. What does the permanent fund look like? And I agree with you. It's the one issue that divides and unites the state of Alaska. In other words, 660,000 people get a dividend. Businesses throughout Alaska benefit from the spending of that. It is the one program that impacts more Alaskans over a longer period of time than any other program we've had, with the exception of maybe public safety and education and roads.
You have a love of history. I believe you've taught history.
Mm-hmm.
So if you were to distance yourself from being governor and look at your first term through the eyes of a historian, what would you see?
I would see an individual that cared less about politics and more about fixing a problem that everyone knows that we have. That's what I would see. If I was a political wonk, not a historian, I might say, well, you know, I don't know if I would have done that, or I wouldn't have done this because that caused this or got people upset. But in terms of history, you know, I'm not going to compare myself with some of the great leaders in history. But when you look at people like Churchill, he was in office for 4 years and voted out right at the end of World War II after leading Great Britain with the United States to victory over Nazi Germany. When you look at politicians, great leaders for Alaska, such as Senator Ted Stevens, who put a lot of time into Alaska, a lot of effort, he was voted out. The only thing I would say and ask the people of Alaska is you need a little bit of time to implement policies that may be painful at first, but outcomes later on may manifest themselves. So really, when it comes to governors and presidents, history is what really tells what that individual really did.
So it's too soon then to...
I think it's too soon. It'd be too soon for anybody.
Coming up, we talk with the governor about one of his inspirations in politics, Donald Trump. What they talk about when the president comes to Alaska. Governor Dunleavy and the President of the United States seem to have what some have called a bromance.
We love Alaska. I think we all love Alaska, right? Sure.
Donald Trump makes a point of inviting the governor to Air Force One when he stops in Anchorage on his way to Europe, one of the highlights of the governor's first year in office. You've had visits with the President of the United States. Mm-hmm. What's he like?
He's the same guy you see in private as you do see out in the open and with the cameras on. I mean, there's no pretense there. He stops here to refuel, there's no doubt about it. But what he does is he lets us know when he's here, wants to know if we've got time, and you know, it's the President of the United States, you're going to have time, but to be able to go on board and discuss Alaska. And the other thing that the President does is he loves to see the troops.
I have to ask you this because this is something that at J-Bear it was reported that President Trump said, "Look at this man, he's all man," in reference to you. Is that true?
Yeah, I think there's a recording of that actually. Yes.
Did you hear that? Hear him say that?
I did hear that. I smiled. I mean, you know, I took it as a compliment. Oftentimes in politics with politicians, there's a political face, and then there's a private face, and sometimes they are two different people. I would say that the president you see before the cameras on national and international news is the same president that will invite my daughter and my wife into Air Force One and look at them and say, would you like something to drink? Is there something I can give you? That's the President of the United States. So I know that there are people, once again, that don't agree with everything President Trump has to say or has to tweet. But for me as a governor of a state, to be able to meet with the President of the United States, I think it's 5 times in less than a year.
Probably more than other governors.
A lot more than other governors. And for him to express a desire to understand what Alaska is all about, what are its needs, how does Alaska play into the resource development for the entire country, to bring jobs back to this country. That's what we talk about. When we're in the Air Force One or in the Oval Office, those are the issues. Those are the issues we're talking about. The President has helped open ANWR, which was something that we tried to get open for years. Even our esteemed Senator Ted Stevens had difficulty opening ANWR under other Republican administrations. Helped open ANWR. He's looking at the Tongass National Forest. I know a lot of people believe it's a national park, but it's a national forest. To get that national forest back to where it could be a multi-use forest that could potentially help underwrite some of the economic development in Southeast Alaska. He's interested in our defense. We're a few miles from Russia. We are under the potential threat of a Korean missile launch. We have a lot going on up at Delta Greely to protect us. We have bases here. So he views Alaska as obviously an integral part of the United States, and so wants to have a discussion on it. I think that's fantastic for Alaska. Look, the man's busy. We talked about being busy as governor. The man is busy, and he has an interest in Alaska.
I've noticed that you've lost a lot of weight. I don't think I would recommend the governor's diet of stress. I wonder if that's a factor of it.
But not at all. Let me tell you. So, we all struggle with our weight. And even though I'm a tall guy, when you start to say, hey, the belt's getting kind of tight, because, when you're in Juneau and in this business, there's food everywhere. And so if you get into a habit of just eating wherever you go, you're going to put on weight.
Every governor has had to find ways to get through the challenges personally. And, I remember Bella Hammond telling me that she and Governor Jay Hammond had a special spot in the governor's house where they would have coffee every morning to kind of get ready for the day. Sarah Palin jogged and had this ritual of meeting Piper at the bus when she was dropped off at the Capitol every afternoon. So what are your rituals? What are you doing to stay sane?
So I got a great family. I have a wonderful family. I have a wonderful wife of 32 years and 3 daughters who the negative doesn't bother them. In other words, they're kind of like me. They determine their own happiness. They determine their own state of mind. We rarely talk about politics at the house. We've got a family. We've got dogs. We've got things going on. I sold the mules. We talked about this. I had to sell my mules because, the job is just too demanding.
It's interesting that when you speak of pets, that you sold your mules.
I know.
And I guess your mules were very dear to you.
Well, they're like a dog. Anyone out there that's a horse person understands what I'm talking about.
But they're also known for their stubbornness. Should we read something into this?
I have a lot of respect for mules because they don't get themselves in danger a lot. They think things through, and they can be stubborn if they're being forced to do the wrong thing. So maybe there's a parallel there.
The governor also says his commute home from Anchorage is one of his stress busters, a drive that helps him unwind. Soon he'll be back at the Capitol for the next session, which gets underway January 21st. Thank you for joining us. We'll see you next week.
It's been just over 7 weeks since I took the oath of office to become the 12th governor in the history of our young state. I'm here today because of the people of Alaska who put their faith in me and in my vision for our great state. I met with President Trump and had the opportunity to brief him on the earthquake damage and recovery efforts. Together, we will restore the trust of the Alaskan people in its government and its elected officials.